Have you ever wondered why you automatically stop at a red light at 3 a.m. when absolutely no one is around?
Right.
Or, why you accept the authority of a boss you wouldn't trust to water your plants while you're on vacation?
It is wild when you actually stop and think about it.
Yeah.
Uh, what you are experiencing there is the invisible architecture of authority.
Yes.
I mean, we spent our entire lives following rules, filling out endless forms, and just deferring to people in charge.
Yeah. And usually without ever stopping to question the underlying mechanics of it all, we accept it as the background noise of society.
Exactly, the background noise.
Yeah. So today, we are decoding exactly how that background noise works in this deep dive. We're looking at Max Weber's foundational text.
It's true classic.
Oh, absolutely. It's The Sociology of Power, which is actually extracted from his massive, somewhat intimidating masterwork, Economy and Society.
Intimidating is the right word for it, yeah.
It really is. But our mission here isn't just to look at who is in charge of a given society.
Yeah.
We want to figure out the why. Like, why do we actually obey them?
And that question requires a completely new lens. To give you that lens, we have to start with this brilliant linguistic hurdle in Weber's original German text.
Right.
He uses two specific words that English translators often just lazily lump together as power or domination.
Which is a huge mistake.
A massive mistake. Because they describe wildly different realities. The words are Macht and Herrschaft.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this for a second, because getting this distinction right unlocks, well, literally everything else we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Let's start with Macht. If I understand Weber correctly here, Macht is just raw, chaotic power.
Yes, raw force.
It's like a schoolyard bully cornering you and stealing your lunch money. It's forceful, it's totally chaotic, and there is zero consent on your part.
None at all.
Right. You are handing over that money strictly because you are being physically overpowered or threatened.
That is a perfect encapsulation of Macht. It's simply the probability that you can force someone to do what you want completely, regardless of their resistance. Now, you have to contrast that chaotic force with Herrschaft. Herrschaft is, it's much more structured.
Right.
So instead of a bully taking your lunch money, Herrschaft is you handing a portion of your paycheck over to a tax collector.
Which feels entirely different. I mean, I don't necessarily want to pay my taxes.
Sure, nobody does.
But I'm not doing it because a guy in a suit is physically wrestling my wallet away from me on the street. I recognize the structure of the system. I have an expectation of obedience.
And that is the magic word right there, obedience.
What?
What's really fascinating here is that Herrschaft requires a minimum will to obey.
Right.
It relies on you, the subordinate, having some kind of interest in complying.
And that interest could be anything, right?
Exactly. It might be material, like wanting to avoid a late fee on those taxes, or it might be spiritual or moral. But fundamentally, your compliance is based on a belief in the ruler's legitimacy.
Legitimacy?
Yes. You pay the tax collector because you believe the state has a legitimate, valid right to collect taxes in the first place.
So for any kind of authority to actually function long term and, not just collapse into constant street brawls, it cannot rely on brute force.
I just can't.
The leader or the system itself has to convince us that they are legitimate. Which brings us to the million-dollar question.
How do they pull it off?
Exactly. How do they convince us? And Weber breaks this down into 3 pure types of legitimate domination. Let's dive into the first one, which is the one that you listening are probably the most intimately familiar with.
Oh, definitely.
Legal rational domination.
Right. So in a legal rational system, your obedience is not owed to an individual human being at all. It is owed to an impersonal order and to the rules themselves.
Like getting pulled over for speeding.
Perfect example. You don't obey the police officer because of their charming personality or their family lineage. You obey the uniform.
Right, and the written legal code that the uniform represents.
Exactly. And Weber says the purest, most concentrated form of this type of authority is the bureaucracy.
And he outlines incredibly specific characteristics for what makes a true bureaucracy, doesn't he?
He does. It's very rigid. You have fixed salaries, specialized training, a rigid hierarchy of command.
Everything is documented in writing.
Everything.
Yeah.
And crucially, there is a total separation between official duties and personal property.
Meaning I don't own my cubicle.
Right. You do not own your cubicle, and the CEO doesn't personally own the company's tax returns.
Which is a massive historical shift.
Oh, huge. If you look at earlier eras, the lines between a king's personal wealth and the state's public treasury were completely non-existent.
Yeah.
A bureaucracy separates the office from the person holding it.
Okay, I have to push back on this a bit, though.
Sure.
Because when Weber describes bureaucracy, he makes it sound like this ultimate, supreme achievement.
He really does.
But everyone listening to this has probably complained about bureaucracy at some point. I mean, we associate it with red tape, endless forms, waiting in line at the DMV, and just profound inefficiency.
No.
If it's so annoying, why on earth did this system conquer the modern world?
It's a totally fair critique. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Weber argues that bureaucracy is technically superior to every other form of administration in human history.
Really?
Yes. He literally compares it to a machine versus manual labor. A bureaucracy offers precision, stability, strict discipline, and above all else, calculability.
Calculability. You mean the idea that if I input X into the machine, I know for an absolute fact that I'm going to get Y out of it.
Precisely. So while the DMV might feel frustratingly slow to you as an individual, on a mass societal scale, it is highly efficient.
Okay, I can see that.
Furthermore, Weber points out a brilliant sociological mechanism here. Bureaucracy inherently creates a kind of social leveling.
How so?
Well, because bureaucratic positions are filled based on technical qualifications, like holding a university degree or passing a standardized civil service exam, it actively dismantles the old systems.
Oh, right. The systems where jobs were just handed out based on aristocratic birth or, who your father was.
Yeah. Exactly.
That makes total sense when you frame it that way. I mean, if I'm driving over a suspension bridge, I want the person who designed it to have passed a rigorous engineering exam.
Not just the king's nephew.
Right. I don't want the job to have gone to the king's nephew just because he needed a hobby.
Exactly.
And that contrast actually bridges us perfectly to Weber's second type of domination, which is what existed before all these rules, traditional authority.
Yes. Traditional authority is basically the authority of the way it's always been.
Right.
Under this system, obedience is owed to the actual person who holds the traditional position of power. It's rooted in deep personal loyalty and the sanctity of immemorial traditions.
So we are talking about patriarchalism or gerontocracy, which is rule by the elders of a community.
Exactly.
And the text details some really wild variations of this, like patrimonialism, where the entire administrative staff of a government is literally just made up of the ruler's family members, or even slaves and personal dependents.
It's incredible to think about.
And then there's sultanism, where the ruler has this absolute arbitrary power backed up by a loyal military apparatus.
And that arbitrary nature is the crucial mechanism to understand here. Under traditional domination, the ruler lives in two spheres.
Oh.
They have a sphere where they are strictly bound by ancient tradition, but outside of that, they have a sphere of total, unchecked personal discretion.
Wow. So they can just do whatever they want.
Pretty much. They can grant a massive favor, demand a sudden tax, or punish a citizen purely based on their mood that morning.
Which sounds like an absolute nightmare if you are trying to, say, run a business or build a future.
It is a total nightmare for business. And this is exactly why Weber argues that traditional domination historically stifles the development of a rational capitalist economy.
Because it's completely unpredictable.
Right. Think about the mechanics of capitalism. You cannot calculate the risk or the cost of a 10-year business venture if your taxes or the legal rulings surrounding your factory depend entirely on the arbitrary whim of a local lord.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Weber calls this a quasi-justice system, where judgments are based on personal, case-by-case wisdom or the ruler's current mood, rather than a predictable, written legal code.
So capitalism physically requires the boring, predictable, red tape bureaucracy in order to function.
It does.
You need the machine so you can do your spreadsheets. But that raises a massive question. If traditional rule traps society in an arbitrary rut and bureaucracy traps society in a rigid, rule-bound machine, how does anything new ever happen?
Right.
How does society actually break out of these systems?
Well, that requires a spark. And that brings us to the third type of authority, charismatic domination. This is the great disruptor of human history.
I found this section completely fascinating.
Yet brilliant.
But before we get into it, I think we need to lay down a very important caveat for the listener, because when we use the word charismatic today, we usually mean someone who's charming or conventionally attractive or, fundamentally good.
Right, like a movie star.
Exactly. But Weber does not mean that at all. His concept of charisma is strictly, ruthlessly value neutral.
That's a really important distinction. Weber applies the label of charisma equally to revered religious prophets and heroic figures, as well as to dangerous demagogues.
Right, it's not a moral judgment.
Not at all. He explicitly mentions the founder of the Mormons and even a berserker warrior.
A berserker warrior.
Yeah, a fighter whose absolute, uncontrollable battle frenzy was viewed by his peers as a magical gift. Weber measures charisma purely by the mechanism of recognition. Do the followers believe this person has an extraordinary, superhuman, or divine gift?
And if they do, charismatic authority exists.
Exactly. It has absolutely nothing to do with moral goodness.
So it's all about devotion. I was reading this and thinking, the perfect modern analogy for a pure, charismatic leader isn't even a politician.
Oh, what is it?
It's a visionary tech startup founder working out of a garage.
Oh, that is good.
Think about it. They completely reject normal economic structures. They aren't paying their people fixed bureaucratic salaries. They are living on venture capital booty or random donations or just ordering pizza at 2 a.m. They don't have employees, they have disciples. And they operate purely on sudden inspiration and visionary pivot points, constantly throwing out the written HR rulebook.
That is a brilliant modern equivalent because it highlights the core mechanism of charisma.
Yeah.
It inherently rejects the past and ignores established rules.
Yeah.
Charisma says, "It is written, but I say unto you, it is a purely revolutionary force."
But as incredible as that revolutionary energy is, it has a massive fatal flaw built right into it.
A succession problem.
Exactly. What happens when that visionary startup founder eventually dies? Or just as likely, what happens when those disciples get a bit older, get tired of sleeping under their desks on a futon, and decide they want to settle down, have kids, and get a steady, predictable paycheck?
This triggers what Weber calls a routinization of charisma. You see, charisma in its pure, fiery form is incredibly unstable and completely anti-economic. You just can't run a society on miracles and pizza forever. To survive the inevitable crisis of succession, the charismatic movement must be transformed. It has to domesticate itself into either traditional or legal rational domination.
And the text outlines the ways movements desperately try to keep the magic alive when the leader is gone.
It's fascinating.
Like they might launch a massive search for a new bearer of the specific traits, which is exactly how the new Dalai Lama is identified.
Yes.
Or they might use oracles. Or the original leader might just designate their own successor on their deathbed. But the most interesting mechanisms are the ones that try to institutionalize the magic.
Right, like hereditary charisma. This is the incredibly powerful belief that the magical spark wasn't just in the leader's soul, but is literally carried in their bloodline.
Wow.
This single belief is the sociological engine that gives rise to royal families, aristocratic systems, and even the rigid hierarchies of the Indian caste system.
And then you have office charisma, which I think is just a brilliant institutional hack.
Oh, totally.
This is the belief that the magic can be transferred through a specific ritual, and it becomes completely separated from the actual character of the human being.
Yes.
Think about the anointing of a priest or the crowning of a king. It fundamentally doesn't matter if the priest is actually a terrible, uninspiring person. The office itself holds the charisma because the ritual was performed correctly.
And we have to remember why this routinization happens in the first place. It is fundamentally driven by economics.
How so?
The followers, the original disciples, they want their chaotic, precarious positions to turn into secure prebends.
Hang on, let's clarify that term. What exactly is a prebend?
A prebend is essentially a permanent stipend or salary drawn from public land or state funds. In feudal times, it might be a fief.
Like a piece of land granted to you in exchange for your service.
Exactly. The disciples want their revolutionary status converted into a permanent, paying job. They want a fief or a bureaucratic office so they can earn a stable living. The wild, unpredictable revolutionary force gradually domesticates itself just to pay the bills.
So this revolutionary fire either burns out or it institutionalizes itself into the very ancient traditions or rigid bureaucracies it originally rebelled against.
Exactly.
But Weber points out that charisma didn't just fade into ancient kingdoms. It actually birthed our modern political systems through what he calls an anti-authoritarian twist.
What's fascinating here is how the core concept of charisma gets flipped entirely upside down to create plebiscitary democracy.
Okay, walk me through that.
Originally, remember, the followers obeyed the charismatic leader out of a sense of absolute, almost religious duty to the leader's magical quality.
Right, it was a one-way street.
But in the modern anti-authoritarian twist, the leader is now viewed as ruling strictly by the grace of the followers. Exactly. The mechanism reverses. The election or the plebiscite becomes the ultimate test of this modern charisma, Think of historical figures like Oliver Cromwell or Napoleon. They seized power, but they felt compelled to hold plebiscites mass votes to prove their legitimacy. The leader is still charismatic, but their authority is now derived entirely from the freely given trust of the masses.
And crucially, if they lose that trust, they can be voted out.
Exactly.
Which leads us right into Weber's deep dive on the machinery that runs these modern democracies, political parties.
Yes.
And I want to be very clear to everyone listening. Weber is analyzing the pure mechanics of power here. His analysis applies universally to all political organizations, whether they are on the far left, the far right, or anywhere in between.
Completely impartial.
Yes, he defines parties as voluntary associations aiming to secure power for their leaders, with the goal of providing material or ideal advantages for their active members.
And Weber dissects the anatomy of a political party like a surgeon. He breaks it down into 4 distinct layers.
Okay, what are they?
At the very top, you have the active leaders.
Makes sense.
Below them are the active members, the people who actually knock on doors, acclaim the leaders, and do the exhausting groundwork.
Right.
Then you have the passive voters.
And Weber has a somewhat cynical, but honestly incredibly observant view of passive voters.
Very
right?
observant, yes.
He basically sees them as the raw material of politics. They're just targets for propaganda and emotional manipulation during election seasons.
That's precisely how the party machine views them. And finally, the 4th layer, you have the hidden financial patrons.
Yes, the financial engine. Weber explicitly likens political parties to capitalist enterprises.
They are massive businesses.
Right. They rely on people who are politically interested to run the machine, and they require massive, massive financing to survive. The text specifically points out historical examples to show how universal this is.
Oh, like Paul Singer?
Exactly. Weber notes how someone like Paul Singer, a wealthy manufacturer, heavily funded the Socialist Party in the exact same way that heavy industry and corporate wealth historically funded conservative parties.
Right.
Weber isn't making a moral judgment here at all. He is simply observing a mechanical fact. The party machine always needs fuel, regardless of its ideology.
And running that massive machine requires specific types of human beings. Here, Weber introduces a really vital sociological distinction between what he calls notables and professional party bureaucrats.
Okay, what's the difference?
Notables are people who have independent wealth and free time. Think of landlords, lawyers with highly flexible practices, or rentiers.
Let me stop you there for a quick ELI 5. A rentier is basically someone who earns passive income from property or investments, right? They don't have to clock in for a 9-to-5 job.
Correct. Because a rentier or a notable is already financially secure, Weber says they can afford to live for politics. They do it for the prestige or the power or their ideals without needing a paycheck from it.
Whereas professional politicians or party bureaucrats do not have that independent wealth, so they have to live from politics.
Exactly.
They physically need the party to win so they can be provided with a salary or a government appointment, like a modern-day prebend, just to feed their families.
Which brings up a rather alarming realization. If political parties are essentially massive corporate machines and charismatic leaders are constantly seeking maximum power to secure resources for their followers, how do societies historically keep them in check?
That is the big question.
Are there any brakes on this vehicle?
Right. If the whole system is geared toward accumulating power and handing out jobs, what stops one person from just taking over everything?
Luckily, Weber outlines some brilliant mechanisms of limitation, starting with a concept called collegiality.
Oh, collegiality. I love this concept.
It's a great structural break.
Right.
It is simply the legal requirement that decisions must be made by a group, like a council, a senate, or a cabinet, rather than by one single person, which would be monocracy.
I love this concept because it's so relatable. It is basically the geopolitical equivalent of having a group text decide where to go for dinner.
So, yeah, exactly.
It absolutely prevents one aggressive person from acting like a dictator and forcing everyone to eat sushi. But the consequence is that it drastically slows down the decision-making process because everyone has to debate and compromise.
That is exactly the dynamic. And historically, this wasn't just a democratic idea. Absolute monarchs actually loved using specialized collegial councils.
Wait, really? Why?
Because if a king was dealing with brilliant, highly trained, expert bureaucrats, people who understood finance or law way better than the king did, the king could feel incredibly outmatched.
Oh, I see.
So the king would force those experts to work in a council. By putting them in a group where they would inevitably argue, compete for favor, and check each other's ambitions, the king engineered a state of gridlock that allowed him to maintain ultimate control.
That is devious. Divide and conquer in the boardroom.
Very effective.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We also limit power through representation, but Weber contrasts two very different types of representation. First, there's the imperative mandate.
All right. In an imperative mandate system, the representative is essentially just a strict messenger for the voters.
Okay.
They're given specific, written instructions by their constituents, and they must vote exactly as they were told. They have no personal discretion.
Wow.
This was very common in early Soviet councils or medieval estates. The representative is legally a servant to the people who sent them.
But modern parliaments and congresses use what Weber calls free representation.
Yes.
In this system, representatives are legally free. They are not legally bound servants to their voters. Technically, according to the rules of the system, they are masters guided only by their own convictions.
Now, in reality, as Weber sharply notes, they are usually guided by the leaders of their political party machine rather than their own conscience.
Naturally.
But this legal freedom is a crucial mechanism.
Why is that?
Because it meant that modern parliaments could actually negotiate, make messy compromises, and pass laws without having to run back to their home districts for permission on every single comma. And this legislative flexibility, this ability to create a predictable, functioning legal system is, once again, exactly what the capitalist economy required to flourish.
It always comes back to the economy with Weber.
Every single time.
So, let's take a step back and synthesize this incredible journey we've been on. We started by unpacking the deep psychological difference between raw, chaotic force, which is Macht,
Right.
and legitimate structured domination, which is Herrschaft. We explored the actual mechanisms leaders use to convince us they are legitimate, whether that's through the rigid calculability of the law, the arbitrary but sacred nature of tradition, or the pure revolutionary magic of charisma.
And we saw how that magical charisma can't last forever.
No.
It inevitably has to routinize and domesticate itself just to survive, turning into the very ancient traditions and bureaucratic offices it once fought against.
Fascinating.
Finally, we've seen how these ancient forces of authority evolved into our modern democracies and political parties, and the structural breaks like collegiality and free representation that try to keep them balanced.
Which brings this all directly back to you listening to this right now. The next time you are sitting in a sterile bureaucratic office, taking a number and filling out a form in triplicate.
Or the next time you are watching a highly charismatic politician rally a cheering crowd on television.
Exactly. You aren't just looking at annoying rules or magnetic personalities. You can now recognize the invisible mechanics of Herrschaft at work.
You are looking at the specific, deeply historical ways human beings have organized obedience.
Exactly. You are seeing the matrix of authority that structures our entire lives.
It's everywhere once you know how to look for it.
It really is. And we want to leave you with one final, frankly haunting thought directly from Weber's text to mull over.
This one sticks with you.
It really does. Weber noted that the modern bureaucratic apparatus, this perfectly calculable, legal, rational machine we've built, is so entirely impersonal that it will continue to function no matter who is sitting at the top desk.
Right.
He observed that a well-built bureaucracy will work for a successful revolution that just violently seized power, or even for a foreign occupying enemy army, exactly as smoothly as it functioned for the legal government the day before.
It is a chilling observation. Weber famously stated that a change in leadership at the top of a bureaucracy is merely a change of dogs, though the collars remain the same.
So we leave you with this question to explore on your own. If the bureaucratic machine we all live inside is truly that neutral, that adaptable, and that unstoppable,
Who is really in control?
exactly. Is it the leader sitting at the desk, or is it the machine itself?